Wright Investment Associates is a multimedia corporation specializing in creating compelling content for authors, broadcast, and cable corporations. Great writing is emotionally articulate. Great writing is concise. Great writing is clear. To be effective in any marketplace, one must master the connotation of language. One must have a perspective on perspective. Join us today as best-selling ghostwriter and chief story consultant Dennis Ross III shares insights on developing compelling content for books, broadcast media, and corporate storytelling. Let's listen in.
This is Dennis Ross. Content is not only king, but it is queen. Whether you are an author, a cable news network, a Fortune 500 company, compelling content is only the beginning, because content must be correctly organized. It must be executed and implemented into the marketplace such that you reach and attach yourself to your targeted demographic. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about books, media, and corporate storytelling, how to say it right. Let's get started. When seeking to reach a targeted demographic, all you have are words. Words are the currency of productivity. The words you use will ultimately determine the fate of your business, your service, your sitcom. Words. When you deal with trying to reach a targeted demographic, the purpose is to have what you feel in your heart attach itself to the hearts of others. And the currency of productivity, the currency of reach, is using the correct words. The implication of words, the inferences of words, the understanding language and how it affects multicultures, understanding the perspective of the listener, not just your perspective, but having a perspective on perspective, all plays into selecting the correct phrases such that you are succinctly expressing an idea that immediately causes the emotive response you seek. We are emotive beings. We don't make decisions logically, although even the most logical of us would like to think so. We are individuals who are thrust forward by love for family, love for work, love for whatever the case may be. And all of that is encased in emotions. And so when you're dealing with assembling an idea and all you have on the table are words, you have to understand which ones to select, which ones to eliminate if you are serious about reaching your goal. Let's talk about how these ideas, the idea of content, compelling content, executing, implementing it, and putting together the correct words, all relate to the first product on our list here, and that is writing books.
Books are powerful because books do three things. Books establish your credibility in your absence. Books transform your opinions into facts. Books position you as an expert. The challenge is this. The time it takes to write a compelling book can be a hindrance for professionals who would most benefit from becoming an author. So, how do you get it done? How do you get the book out of your head and into the hands of your reader? How do you monetize that story you've been carrying around for years? Let's listen in as Dennis further explains the book writing process.
As a professional ghostwriter, I write books for authors all over the world. They come to me with a compelling story that they need written as compelling as it was lived. They come to me with many times disjointed ideas, disconnected events that happen over 20 or 30 years. And so my job is to sit down, assess the landscape, and quickly figure out where the diamonds lie in their story, and with words, excavate those diamonds and cut those to shine brightest, leaving the dirt behind. Books are powerful, and there are several reasons for this, but let's just discuss a few. As the economy has expanded globally, competition has also expanded globally. So no matter how good your idea is, no matter how fascinating your script is, no matter how crazy your life has been, you cannot reach everybody who would be reached if they could hear your story. And so what a book does is it goes into the marketplace and establishes your audience, establishes your credibility in your absence. Let me say that again. The power of a book is it establishes your position in the marketplace. It establishes your credibility in your absence, such that when you do speak to the person who's trying to hire you for your legal services, trying to hire you as a clinician in whatever your area is, trying to hire you as an architect to design their building, they come to you already giving you the leverage that your expertise provides, that they have established in their private time, in their discretionary time, before going to bed, while at the office, as they're reading your book. And so the conversation changes. But how do you put a book together? What is, is it just a matter of putting together compelling content, selecting the right words, and then delivering it? The most important part of writing a book has nothing to do with writing. The most important part of a book is thinking correctly before you write. And I call that finding your pilot light. Let me ask you a question. What is your pilot light? What is that thing that has kept you going all of these years? Who is that person? What is that event? What is that disappointment? What is that abuse? What is that thing that keeps the fire burning in you every single day, that allows you to have the fuel even beyond the point when you think you cannot go any further, to in fact to go further? When an individual calls and says, I have a fascinating book idea, I want to write it, before we write a word, before we sit down and work out how exactly the story is going to be told from narrative construction to story arc, I ask them, what is your pilot light? Now, most people sort of push back from that and say, well, that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. In fact, I remember recently writing a book for a clinical psychologist, and a fascinating woman, and she came to me with 800 pages of research. She had the idea all laid out. Everything was going to flow in this particular way. She had an outline, and that was all cute. But I stepped away from that and said, introduce me to yourself at 13. Oh, well, I don't really want to talk about that. I have my PhD in this field, and let me talk about the research for, how this needs to go this way within the school system and within the corporate world, because my research says, no, we don't want to hear about that. What we're interested in, and we'll hear about that stuff later, is what is your pilot light? Who are you? What has allowed you to get to this place in your life? And so in that first interview we had, I asked her a question. I said, so imagine we have just finished the book. You told me about your childhood. We've gone through all the research, we've assembled it correctly, and now we have a book that's going to be basically a Bible for your particular industry forward. I just have one more question. What do you want me to say in the acknowledgments page to your dad? And she paused. We hadn't discussed her father throughout the entire book. We had discussed research. We had discussed how this research affects the marketplace and how she was going to grow her company as a consultant to implement this research in the corporate frame. But we stumbled upon her pilot light at the very end by putting the end at the beginning. Tell me about your father. We had to stop the interview as she became rather emotional about this particular topic. And then we got to the real story of a dysfunctional home, the real story of a disappointed little girl who had so much love for her family that certain events took down a different path, that sent her to America, that got her into school, that allowed for her to have the fire to pursue her PhD, to make her dad happy, to finally please him, only to find that a couple of months before she walks down the aisle to receive her PhD, walk across the stage, her father passes. You may say, well, what does it have to do with her as a clinical psychologist? Everything. Because now that we had the correct perspective, now that we understood where her pilot light was, we were able to encase all of this information, all of this research with humanity. Now when someone reads the book, it's going to have a totally different effect. No one really cares about research. Research is everywhere. No one cares. What we do care about is how were you able to make it? How were you able to get through dysfunctions I am now currently experiencing. The most powerful books are not books that tell your story, but that are books that allow the reader to understand theirs. And so when you deal with writing a book, before a word is written, first you must establish what is that thing. Uncover that place, that secret place. You have to establish that pilot light. Once you have established that pilot light, your book can go places you never imagined. Let's move on.
Your pilot light is your writing perspective. It is the angle of your expression. Embracing your pilot light creates a tangible authenticity in your book, one that speaks directly to the heart of your reader. Your pilot light is what keeps your literary fire burning page after page.
So we've established the pilot light, we've established the correct perspective. Now, to get to the actual writing of the book, how should the book be written for authors, best-selling authors, individuals who want to become best-selling authors? Think of this. When you approach the writing of your book, you must approach it just like you appreciate a great movie. Notice when you go to a movie theater, you don't see for the first 5 or 10 minutes the actual crew setting up the lights, the actress coming down and making a fuss because her chocolate chip cookies weren't delivered on time. You don't see the director arguing with the cinematographer. All you see is everything that happened after the director said, action. When you're thinking about writing your book, don't set up anything. Don't show us the lights. Don't show us the catering company. Show us what happens immediately in the story. Here's the wrong way to write it. It was May 27th. I was standing on the street corner. A woman in a red dress was in front of me. She walked across the street and I followed behind her closely, looking more closely at her dress than I should have been looking at traffic. Before I knew it, she fell. Standing over her body, I wondered what I could have done differently. But then she looked up and said, "It's okay, I fall like this all the time." Now notice, if we started that same paragraph, cutting out the entire description, walking across the street, following her closely, not looking at traffic, and started the paragraph like this, standing over her body, I wondered what I could have done differently. But then she looked up and said, "It's okay, I fall like this all the time." Do you see the difference? The difference is, as opposed to wasting time on the setup, I only gave you action. When you're dealing with readers who approach books from antagonistic perspectives, from the word go, you have to immediately start in the action and the best part of the action. Notice in the phrase I mentioned, there is what we call emotional misdirection. Notice, standing over her body, immediately your reader is saying, first of all, who is standing over her body? Why is she described as a body and not a woman? What has he done to her? What is going on? Is anyone around? Is anyone seeing this? All of these things have been inferred and implied in that one sentence. What does that mean? The reader continues to read.
So let's review. The number one goal, the number one priority for your book is to keep your reader reading. If this does not occur, nothing else matters. Keeping your reader engaged requires more than just having great ideas. You must understand the sequence in which these ideas are best presented. And as we've learned, a most effective method in keeping the reader reading is to eliminate the setup and start your book with action. Let's continue listening as best-selling ghostwriter and chief story consultant Dennis Ross III concludes our discussion on writing books.
If you are a business owner, if you are an entrepreneur, if you are an individual who's lived a compelling life and need it written as compelling as it was lived, if you're not writing a book, you're essentially going around the block to get across the street. No matter how great of a speaker you are, no matter how articulate you are as it relates to what you know, your perspective, your ideas, your wisdom, you cannot be everywhere and you cannot reach everyone who would be reached if they could hear your story. What a book does is it takes your story into the world and establishes your value in your absence. So writing your book changes everything because it is the sharpest tool that is most effective for cutting through the marketplace. How will you distinguish yourself? How will you distinguish your business, your service? So you've spent all these years, you've spent countless dollars on marketing materials, on glossy brochures, on websites, but you've never written a book. Many times people are simply satisfied with knowing their life is compelling, and they never take the next step to actually execute and get this book written. It is time to actually place in some type of material, tangible form, all of this wisdom you've gained the hard way over the years. It is very critical that you have collateral, a book, to actually back up your views that benefit your added value to your clients. Imagine if you went to a business meeting and instead of giving someone your business card, you gave them your book. Imagine if the story that you've been told you should always have put in a book was finally put in a book such that it could be considered for a sitcom or for a movie or short film, whatever the case may be. Writing a book is powerful, not for the reasons you may think though. You do not write a book to make money from selling the book. You write a book to position yourself such that you demand a premium from all of the other things you are doing. Let me say that again. You don't write a book to make money from selling a book. You may very well do that, and that's wonderful, and we all hope you do. But the core purpose of writing a book is to position you at a higher profile level such that your credibility is established in your absence, such that you're winning clients and you're not with them, such that everything else that you're doing, whether it be speaking, whether it be consulting, whatever the purpose or the service is that you offer, those things, all of those items demand a higher premium because you are an author on that subject. The second myth as far as writing a book is this: it just takes too long, and that it does. It takes many months of interviews. It takes a pretty intense, elongated piece of time to get a book to the place where the manuscript is publishing ready, such that it is written correctly, edited correctly, designed, manufactured. It is definitely a process. But the other flip side is this: you don't have to write it. And so the power of ghostwriting is this: you can take your story, turn your story over to an individual who writes for a living, and allow that person to assemble the story from a third-party professional eye such that only the strongest parts of your story make it to the manuscript. We like to tell clients, writing your book will change everything. The good news is you don't have to write it.
Let's talk about corporate storytelling.
The genius of Steve Jobs is that he took technology and made it comfort food. The genius was that he allowed for products sold to millions of people across the world to all individually feel personal. Think about it: an iPad, an iPod. I is the word most repeated by all human beings from the time we're born. I'm hungry, I want this, I want that. It's so much more effective than saying my pad, my pod. When you think about positioning your product such that it tells a story, what words are you using? When you think about a product or establishing a brand that it connects itself to its user, what are you using as the connectivity point? Apple has successfully personalized the most impersonal of products. Microchips, screens have become personal. This is a critical lesson because as corporations seek to launch new products into the retail market, it's no longer just enough to say we have the new this that does the new that. There has to be a story. There has to be a narrative that allows the piece of clothing, the product, the technology to become personal from the word go. At Wright Investment Associates, we're brought in by corporations all the time to frame the narrative, to take pieces of inanimate products and create a story around it such that when it is sold to the customer, they see themselves in the product. They are not simply being imposed by putting on the shirt to represent us, but no, this shirt represents you. And so it is an entire, if you think about it, if you think about the genius of Jobs and you think about what, and there are many other examples, but just using him as the most recent modern genius essentially, You have to remember that he took technology and made it comfort food, much like chicken soup. He has allowed for a piece of technology this wide, this long, or this wide and this long to become something you want to crawl up in bed with and spend time with. So what are you saying about your product? What are you're spending millions of dollars in advertising and marketing, but my question is, what is the story? What is the character? Is it that this just simply has new features? That's not enough for the marketplace. Establish your story, establish your market, and you will reach your audience infinitely.
Each year, corporate advertisers spend billions of dollars on ideas that don't work. But why don't they work? Let's listen in.
Corporate storytelling, I can tell you many stories about corporations that have come with products that were average at best, but because the story around it, the narrative construction around it encased its mediocrity, it was able to be successful in the marketplace. And so when you're thinking about launching, when you're thinking about advertising, when you're thinking about marketing, it's much more than simply having cute, clever phrases. It's much more than having bright colors on the website or having global distribution such that it can reach everyone around the world. And so when I consult with corporations about how to position their product for the power of story to take over the product itself, thus creating a following, creating almost a myth around the product, I ask 3 questions. Number 1, what is the story? Number 2, can it be explained in 1 sentence? Number 3, does it have character? Now, we went over what is the story, but let's just go through number 2 briefly. Great stories are always simple, always. They have complex implications and they can grow on their own. They have nuances that attach itself to all readers, all viewers, because everyone brings to the table their experiences. But in essence, a great story is simple. I remember Quincy Jones explaining one time, the genius producer, that if your song cannot be played with 1 finger, you don't have a song. And I never forgot that. If your story cannot be told in 1 sentence, you need to work on story. Number 3, does the product, do your services have character? This takes somewhat of a repositioning of the thought process because one doesn't necessarily think about character as it relates to their service. If you're an attorney and you offer legal services, you think about yourself having a character as an individual, but not necessarily your services having a character. But that is exactly what makes the difference in the marketplace when it becomes indistinguishable between who you are and what you do, such that individuals would not dare go to anyone else because they have a cheaper price or because they have attached themselves to the character of your service. And that's a different concept. You can offer consulting services, you can offer engineering services, you can offer, as I said, legal services, and have those services create a character, a persona, an aura that is totally separate from you as the clinician, as the professional. The marketplace doesn't do anything. The people inside of the marketplace do things. And so when you think about your service, when you think about relationships, you have to think in the same way that you think about personal relationships. It's not personal, it's just business. That's actually wrong. And so in a global marketplace, when individuals can do business with anybody, everything becomes personal. It is no longer business, it's just personal. In today's market, if you do not forge yourself into your services such that there's no distinguishing line between who you are or what you do, and if you don't leverage the characteristics that your best friends like about you and insert those into the services you have no edge in the marketplace. You're simply an attorney offering legal services where someone will shop around and get the lowest price, or you're simply a clothing store offering the same suit that everyone online offers, and as soon as someone finds the lowest price, you will lose the business. But when you insert personality into your product, when you have a story that illuminates your product, when you have character in your product, then you have no competition. No more than your best friend has competition for being your best friend against someone who you just met yesterday. There's no competition because you are attached to that character, that individual, that relationship. Corporate storytelling is the art of inserting the personal qualities that allow you to be who you are into that product or service such that it attaches itself relationship-wise with your customer. And when that happens, that is when brand takes off. That is when an individual does not mind paying a premium for your service because they're not making a decision on price, they're making a decision on the character of your service or product. Look at your product, look at your service, and answer the question, what is the story?
The corporate story consultants of Write Investment have designed this portion of the program to provide professional writers throughout the publishing and multimedia spectrum impactful insights towards developing compelling messages that grab hold of your targeted audience and never let go.
What is the connection between that shirt, those shoes, that television, that software, that application that you've just designed? What is its connection beyond its description that allows it to attach itself to the hearts of your audience? What is that thing? The genius of Steve Jobs is this. He took technology and made it comfort food. He took an iPad, an iPod, and made it a cup of soup that people wanted to crawl up in bed with and literally go to sleep next to. The power of corporate storytelling is when you go beyond what that thing actually does, what that service actually does, go beyond the added value described in the business plan and tap into the story, the humanity of that piece of technology. That is the missing transformation that causes advertisers and corporations to spend billions and billions of dollars each year and still not reach their target audience. Corporate storytelling, which is the art of taking inanimate objects and inanimate services and making them human, infusing into them characteristics, infusing into them demeanor. Corporate storytelling is the power of that connection between that thing and that person.
If you're an author or media corporation, we'd welcome speaking with you about your content needs. You can reach us by calling the number on your screen. For Dennis Ross III and Write Investments Associates, thank you for joining us.
Remember, monsters are not real. You're just a little bit real. A little bit, right here.